In the autumn of 1931, a 10-year-old boy named Albert Francis Capone sat alone at lunch in a Chicago private school. The other children whispered. They pointed. They moved their desks away from his. Not because of anything young Albert had done, but because of a name that carried the weight of headlines and fear and a reputation that followed him like a shadow he never asked for. His father was Al Capone, and that name, which commanded respect on Chicago's streets, had become a burden too heavy for small shoulders to carry. This is a Chicago story from a time when a father's reputation could destroy a child's innocence. But it's also the story of how one man, working in complete secrecy, chose wisdom over force, love over pride, and created a miracle that his son wouldn't discover for 27 years. Albert Francis Capone, Sonny as his family called him, was 13 in 1931, a quiet boy whose mother May had tried to shield him from his father's world through private schools and careful distance from the men who visited their Prairie Avenue home. But something had changed. The boy who used to chatter about his day had become silent. The child who used to beg for friends to visit had stopped asking. And late at night, May would sometimes hear muffled sounds from his room, the kind that come from crying into a pillow, trying to make sure no one else can hear. Sonny had made a decision that would break his parents' hearts if they knew. He was going to protect them from his pain. He would pretend everything at school was fine, that he had friends, that he belonged, because he loved his father too much to add to the burdens already weighing on those broad shoulders. Every morning, Sonny practiced his smile in the mirror. "How was school today?" his parents would ask, and he'd answer with carefully rehearsed stories. Stories about classmates who didn't exist. Stories about invitations that never came. Stories about a life that was everything his parents hoped and nothing like reality. He ate lunch alone, reading books to avoid the empty chairs around him. He spent Saturdays in his room, telling his parents he preferred staying home. Other parents, when they learned his last name, found excuses. Sudden illnesses, prior commitments, anything to keep their children away from Chicago's most famous gangster's son. But Sonny never complained. He'd inherited his father's quiet strength and channeled it into protecting the people he loved most. He was gentle where his father was feared, thoughtful where his father was decisive, and increasingly, heartbreakingly alone. Teachers at St. Patrick's Academy watched him sit by himself day after day, politely declining their offers to help, insisting with quiet dignity that he was just fine, thank you. They didn't see the moments when his facade cracked, when he'd duck into empty classrooms to compose himself, or how his hands shook throwing away lunch invitations accidentally placed in his bag, quickly retrieved with whispered apologies. Al Capone first sensed something wrong on a Tuesday evening in October. The house was unusually quiet. May was setting the table with mechanical precision, her movements careful and controlled. "Where's Sonny?" he asked. "Upstairs. Homework." Her voice was steady, but her husband of 13 years heard the tension underneath. Capone climbed the stairs. Through Sonny's closed door, he heard pencil scratching on paper, then complete silence, the kind that comes from holding one's breath. "Sonny, dinner, coming, Pop." The voice was bright, cheerful, perfectly normal, but in the split second before his son answered, Capone had heard something that would haunt him, the soft sound of someone quickly wiping their face. At dinner, Sonny chatted about classes, mentioned a book, even laughed at his father's weather joke. Everything was normal, everything was fine, everything was exactly what loving parents would want to hear. But Al Capone hadn't built an empire by accepting surface appearances. That night, watching his son describe a mathematics lesson with just a little too much enthusiasm, Capone felt something cold settle in his stomach. Sonny was performing, and he was very, very good at it. Over the following weeks, Capone began to watch with the patient, methodical attention he'd learned where missing details could get you killed. Sonny never mentioned specific friends anymore, just some kids. When May suggested inviting a school friend for dinner, Sonny always had reasons why it wouldn't work out. Most tellingly, he'd stopped asking for anything. No new books, games, clothes, nothing. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Capone parked across from St. Patrick's Academy and waited. At 3:15, children poured out laughing, shouting, running to waiting parents. Capone watched groups form and dissolve, watched children link arms and skip toward home. Then he saw his son. Sonny emerged alone, walking with careful dignity toward their driver. No one called his name. No one ran to catch up. As he passed a group of boys his age, one pointed, another whispered. For just a moment, less than a second, Sonny's shoulders sagged like a plant wilting in the sun. Then he straightened up, lifted his chin, and continued walking with quiet grace. That night, Al Capone sat in his study until 3 in the morning, staring at untouched whiskey. He'd seen men broken by bullets, destroyed by betrayal, crushed by circumstances. But nothing had been as heartbreaking as watching his 13-year-old son pretend to be happy to protect his parents from the truth. Capone called in sick the next day and began his most important investigation. He spoke with Frank, their driver of 6 years. "Tell me about the boys' school days. Everything you see." Frank's face grew troubled. "Mr. C, the kid's always ready early, always first one out, never talks to nobody. And last month I heard him crying in the back seat. Real quiet. When I asked if he was okay, he said something was in his eye. But it was raining. Nothing could have been in his eye except tears." May learned even more heartbreaking details. Other parents were polite but distant. Playdate suggestions met with vague excuses. Birthday parties were family only. Saturday activities were quite full. These weren't malicious people. They were decent families protecting their children from association with a name that carried too much baggage. But their caution was suffocating her son. That evening, May and Al wept together. For their boy's loneliness, for his courage in hiding it, for an impossible situation their love couldn't seem to fix. "We could send him to boarding school," May whispered. "That's not protecting him. That's abandoning him," Capone replied. "I won't let my reputation drive my son from his home." Al looked at his wife and made a decision requiring all his strategic thinking but none of his usual methods. "We fix it, but we fix it so he never knows it needed fixing." What followed was Capone's most delicate operation. He studied St. Patrick's Academy like surveying territory, but looking for opportunities to help, not weaknesses to exploit. Depression-era Chicago had left many institutions struggling. The school had families behind on tuition, a bare-bones lunch program, cut activities, perfect. On a Thursday morning in November, well-dressed Mr. Anthony Romano, one of Capone's most trusted associates, walked into the principal's office representing the newly incorporated Chicago Catholic Education Foundation. "Father McKenna, our foundation wants to establish a substantial scholarship program here, full tuition, books, uniforms, and meals for 25 children from struggling families." The priest's eyes lit up. Such a program was worth thousands annually. "Our benefactor has one requirement," Romano continued. "Complete anonymity. No plaques, no recognition, no public acknowledgement, and priority should be given to children experiencing social difficulties, those who sit alone, seem isolated despite their abilities." Father McKenna thought immediately of several students, including young Sonny Capone, but also dozens of other children whose families had fallen on hard times. Within a month, the transformation was remarkable. 25 children suddenly had new uniforms, full lunch trays, proper supplies. The social dynamics shifted dramatically. Children isolated by economic circumstances found themselves equal with classmates. The cafeteria became a community space where children from all backgrounds mixed freely. At the center of this transformation, quietly and naturally, was Sonny Capone. As one of the older students treating scholarship children with consistent kindness, he found himself at the heart of a new social ecosystem. These children, grateful for acceptance and judging peers by character rather than reputation, became Sonny's first real friends. May watched the change in her son with wonder and growing suspicion. Sonny began bringing friends home, joined the debate team, started asking to stay after school. Most importantly, his carefully constructed facade gave way to genuine happiness. But May noticed something else: her husband's mysterious interest in the school, his questions about Sonny's new friends, his quiet satisfaction during dinner conversations. "All," she said one evening after Sonny had gone to bed. "What did you do?" For a long moment Capone said nothing. Then he folded his newspaper and looked at his wife with eyes that held both pride and exhaustion. "I gave him what I never had," he said quietly. "A fair chance. A place where people could see who he really is instead of who they think he should be because of my name. But he doesn't know, and he never can know. If Sonny finds out, it ruins everything. It makes him think his friendships aren't real, that he needs his old man to fight his battles. The whole point is for him to believe he earned this himself." May understood that the man newspapers called a ruthless criminal had just pulled off the most sophisticated, compassionate operation of his career, and no one would ever know. Years later, long after Al Capone had served his time and died, Sonny would remember those school years as the happiest of his childhood. He never suspected the truth, not until a spring evening in 1958, 27 years later. Sonny was now Albert Francis Capone Jr., a 40-year-old businessman in Florida with his own family. May, now 74 and ill, had asked him to visit. She had things to share while she still could. They sat on her Miami Beach porch as evening fell. After talking about his children and business, May grew quiet, looking out at the ocean as if seeing something far beyond the horizon. "Sonny, there's something about your school days you need to know, something your father made me promise never to tell while he was alive. But now, You should know what kind of man your father really was. Sonny felt the old wariness. May, I don't need to know about. Not that, May interrupted gently. This is about you, about how lonely you were at St. Patrick's Academy. Sonny's breath caught. He'd never told his parents about those early struggles. You were 13 years old, breaking your own heart trying to protect ours, May said. Did you really think we didn't notice? That we didn't see you practicing smiles in the mirror every morning? That we couldn't hear you crying into your pillow at night? Tears sprang to Sonny's eyes. Tears for that lonely boy he tried to forget. May took his hand. Your father knew, sweetheart. He knew, and it was killing him. Because Al Capone, for all his power, couldn't fight what was hurting his son most. He couldn't force other children to be your friends or make other parents forget his name. So what did he do? May smiled. The first real smile he'd seen from her in months. He gave you what he always wanted for himself. A fair chance. Then she told him everything. The Chicago Catholic Education Foundation that existed only from 1931 to 1936. Mr. Anthony Romano, his father's associate playing philanthropist. The scholarship program that transformed not just his school experience, but his entire understanding of belonging. The lunch programs, activities, library books, all funded by his father's money through shell corporations. But most importantly, May said, tears bright in her eyes, he made sure you'd never know. Because if you found out, it would change everything. You'd doubt whether your friendships were real, think you were a charity case instead of a young man worthy of friendship just because of who you are. Sonny sat stunned as pieces of his childhood rearranged into a completely different picture. He watched you every day after the program started, May continued. He'd find excuses to drive by school at dismissal, sit in that big Cadillac watching you walk out with friends, laughing like any normal boy. And every day he'd come home with tears in his eyes, seeing something he'd never had, his son accepted for who he was. Why tell me now? May's grip tightened. Because your father is gone, and soon I will be too. I want you to know that everything good that happened in those years happened because you deserved it. The friends you made, the confidence you gained, that was all you. Your father just created conditions where people could see who you really were. She wiped her cheeks. In a life full of regrets, your father never regretted spending that money. Every dollar spent, every risk taken to keep it secret, every moment of joy he saw on your face talking about friends, it was all worth it to him. Sonny buried his face in his hands and wept. He wept for the father he'd thought he understood, but never really known. For the man who'd had power to buy anything but chose to buy something he could never take credit for. For all the times he'd wished his father had been different, not knowing that in the ways that mattered most, Al Capone had been everything a father should be. The story of Al Capone and his son's school troubles isn't the kind of tale that makes headlines or fills police reports. It's quieter than that, more human than that, more profound than that. It's the story of a father who faced a problem that couldn't be solved with money or influence or fear, and who found a solution that required not just wisdom and patience, but the ultimate sacrifice of any parent, giving your child what they need while never being able to take credit for it. It's the story of love so complete that it demanded invisibility, of strength so profound that it required silence, of a man who understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to succeed on their own terms, even if those terms were secretly created by your own careful planning. In a life marked by violence and headlines, by power struggles and legal battles, the anonymous scholarship program at St. Patrick's Academy may have been Al Capone's finest achievement. Not because it was clever, though it was. Not because it was effective, though it transformed his son's life completely, but because it was an act of pure love, given without condition and without recognition. The program continued long after the Capone family had moved away from Chicago. Generations of children benefited from what they believed was simply the generosity of an anonymous benefactor. Teachers and administrators spoke for decades about the mysterious donation that had transformed their school community in the early 1930s, never knowing they were speaking about the love of a father for his son. May Capone kept her husband's secret for 27 years after the program began, and 11 years after his death. When she finally told Sonny the truth in 1958, she gave him something more precious than any inheritance, the knowledge that he had been loved more deeply than he'd ever imagined. Sonny never spoke publicly about what his mother had told him. Like his father, he understood that some gifts lose their power when they're exposed to public view. But he carried the knowledge with him for the rest of his life, and it changed how he saw everything. His father, his childhood, his own role as a parent. When Sonny's children were grown and had children of their own, he would sometimes tell them a story. Not the whole story. Some secrets are too sacred to share completely. But he would tell them about a time when actions mattered more than recognition, when love was measured not by what people saw but by what they never knew. He would tell them that the most powerful people aren't the ones who demand credit for everything they do, but the ones who find ways to help others succeed while remaining completely invisible. He would tell them that real strength isn't about being seen as strong, but about making sure the people you love never have to be as strong as you've had to be. And sometimes, when his grandchildren would complain that nobody appreciated their efforts or recognized their contributions, Sonny would smile and say something his mother had told him that night in Miami Beach: "The greatest gifts are the ones nobody ever knows about. The love that matters most is the love that expects nothing in return." That's the real legacy of Al Capone's secret scholarship program. Not the money that was spent or the children who were helped, though both were significant. The real legacy was the lesson it taught about the nature of unconditional love, about the power of acting without recognition, about what it truly means to sacrifice for your family. It's a lesson that doesn't make headlines, but it's the kind that changes lives. And in the end, perhaps that's what matters most: